I think we were talking about, paper bags full of cash that they were sending back to Iran.
Pallets of cash. But what do you expect?
Pallets of cash, that's right.
I wonder if Anthony Blinken was making those comments when he was jamming out with his middle-age, old timers jam band in the Hamptons. Just the worst, diplomatic disaster after disaster after disaster. Look what's going on in Ukraine. Okay, the situation we have within Israel. You thought Jimmy Carter was the worst, and then you got Obama, and then you got Biden, and this was it just went from things just keep getting worse and worse and worse for the left, which I think will be a theme that we'll talk more about today. But for them to try to take an iota of credit for this peace deal it's so laughable. It's beyond comprehension.
Yeah. All right, Mike, I got to get your take on the anxiety going on in the banking sector. Let's slip in a short break. Real quick, Mike Lee, your thoughts on this credit anxiety. How do you see things? Mike Lee.
Maria, it's important to realize that it's never been, you've never had a systemic problem or a market meltdown from risk assets falling apart. Okay, the most recent in 2008, that was from AAA mortgage bonds. Right, when the market started selling off long-term capital, that was governments playing on high-quality that was sovereign wealth funds betting on high-quality currencies. So if something falls apart in the private credit market, there is no systemic risk because it's just a small portion. It's a small enough portion of the overall pie where it doesn't create systemic risk. So when you hear these sell-offs for this, I would say these are buying opportunities outside of the individual banks that may be stuck holding the bag for these fraud situations.
Very good point. All right, we will during that period under the Biden administration, we later learned that there was 1,000 people in government that were talking with social media, telling social media to shut down posts and cancel individuals on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and they did it. They all did it. Biden told them to do it, they did it.
But, Maria, the corruption and overreach of the Democrats, we'll never really know the full story. The only reason we know about this late expiring incident is from a whistleblower. And so you basically have three people at the top of the FBI. You have Kash, Dan Bongino, and Andrew Bailey just showed up there. And then you have this entire institutional rot and corruption. And it's only whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork showing the leadership where the bodies are buried, so to say, and putting all these things together. And just, again, take a step back. Okay, you have two of the most corrupt prosecutors in the history of our country. There have been very few criminal prosecutions ever overturned 9-0 by the Supreme Court. One of which was Andrew Weissman, who effectively ran the Mueller probe because we now know Bob Mueller has moved on in years. Okay, and then the second one is Jack Smith. These are two of the most corrupt prosecutors, specifically for being overzealous, stepping over the lines, manufacturing evidence. Okay, they sent after President Trump. That's who these people are. They are authoritarians. Everything they accuse Trump of and Trump of doing is exactly what they've done themselves. And it's you're surprised when these news headlines come out, but why should you be? We don't even know the half of it. And this January 6th committee was totally and completely corrupt, just like the impeachments. It all, I think President Trump is right. It all leads back to Obama in 2015 and 16.
Yeah, he said it. The president knew exactly how high up the ladder it went, right to Obama, President Trump told us. And, yeah, it's pretty extraordinary what we're watching. That, Michael, as well, but also there's this overriding layer right now where investors are worried about regional banks. They're rebounding this morning after a credit-driven sell-off last week. Investors are betting the stress could be limited to one-off loan losses, not broader systemic risks, but we don't know. I mean, the major banks showed strong third-quarter results, solid profitability, good capital markets, revenue, stable credit quality across the sector. But we're also watching a packed earnings lineup this week. Netflix, Tesla, Intel, and Ford reporting. Michael, how do you assess things?
Yeah, look, I think these fears on the regional banks are very much overdone. Look, I'm sure there are some problems out there with individual companies, and it looks to be a result of fraud with First Brands and some of these other names. But broadly speaking, things are good and they are getting better. We just passed a massive fiscal stimulus. Rates are coming down. So the odds for a rate cut next week are 98.1%. Odds for a rate cut in December are north of 90. And then another one in January, the odds are 50-50. And so that will shift, or once you get to January, that will shift. But the cost of funding is going to come down. This curve is going to get steeper, which makes it a lot easier for these banks to lend. It makes it a lot easier for them to make money. And so I'm not worried about this at all. And I think the real kicker here is that the market itself is waiting for the other shoe to drop. And this goes all the way back to the tariff tantrum, where by and large, the hedge fund community, the long-short equity hedge fund community, has missed out on this rally. The margin calls that they faced in the light of that volatility and the pull-in and leverage, they massively degrossed. And so you're seeing gross leverage come back up, but not net leverage, meaning they are not net long stocks. There's a tremendous amount of bearish equity sentiment. And so we're going into this earnings season, we are likely to dramatically beat expectations. The estimate was for 8% growth coming into this quarter. We're already tracking at 8.5. We're going to come in my estimation, materially higher against a rate cut backdrop with fiscal stimulus coming in. And oh yeah, you have a buyback window that opens up next week on the 28th for most companies, okay, with bearish positioning. So when you put all those together, you're likely to get kind of a blow off the top situation where maybe we'll have these fits and spurts of pullbacks, but the market is heading higher, likely much, much higher as especially this AI stuff starts to come into play. So again, it'd be much nicer to buy stocks cheaper, but I could not be more bullish than I am right now.
So the buyback window is a good point to make, because that's when companies can resume buying back their own stock.
Yeah, so for the most of the S&P 500, it's going to start on the 28th of next week. I mean, it's different for every single company based on when they report earnings, but there's going to be a flood of buying coming in there. And this year has just been another year of the retail investor just absolutely destroying the institutional investor and the buy the dip strategy. So any of these pull-offs or sell-offs or pullbacks, people that missed out are doing what I'm doing and what my clients are doing, is looking for names they might have missed out on, or taking additional cash they had on the sidelines, trillions of dollars in money markets, and throwing it into stocks and hoping to make money. And so Morgan Stanley did a report that this has been the best return for buying the dip, meaning what's your average daily return the day after a large sell-off, and it's close to 0.4%, which is the largest in the last 25 years. So there are a tremendous amount of good things going on here, and I think you look at the forward PE estimate of the S&P 500, it's over 22. I think in reality, when we look back a year from now at this point, that's probably closer to an 18 or 19, because earnings are going to come in much higher than expected, still higher than you'd say want to, but that doesn't mean stocks won't go materially higher from here.
All right. Well, we will leave it there and keep watch. Thank you so much for that, gentlemen. Christopher Marinac, we appreciate you joining us. Michael, you're with us all morning long, and we're grateful for that. Quick break and then ends. It'll actually serve them well in the 2026 elections. Them and all their socialism sold to you. See what happens to New York, and then people will be coming back to Republicans. But on the other hand, it could certainly indicate a movement for the Democrat Party that widens across the country.
Yeah, Maria, I think long-term, if Mandami wins for Republican politics, you could make a pretty good argument it's for the benefit of them. But you don't want to see the number one city in the world burn just so you can score some political points and show how stupid this guy is. Talks about affordability. He's going to come in with insane government overreach and regulations, which is why New York City is unaffordable. Right, so he's going to double down on stupid, but what he really is an indictment on the education system in our country. It's a bunch of rich kids that are pissed off that their student loans are so much and this and that, and have been taught all sorts of nonsense by other insane left-wing wackos that were out this past weekend doing God only knows at these stupid protests. But look, part of the reason why Mandami is here is because Cuomo was a horrible governor. Okay, New York City is a mess because a lot of the policies that he championed. Okay, he has run a terrible campaign, and like a lot of the establishment behind him are getting blindsided because they're just so used to being sitting in power. They have no idea what's going on the ground. It's the same reason why most of America, like a lot of the political establishment, is blindsided by Trump. They're getting blindsided by these populist leftist candidates, even if they are communists and Islamic sympathizers. Look, this is bad news all around, and like even if Curtis Leawood drops out, I think there's no chance that Mandami loses because he is an unbelievable get out the vote operation, which is what won him in the primary. Cuomo is nothing like that. He just has a bunch of rich establishment Democrats behind him.
Wow, really interesting analysis there. And I spoke with Cuomo just the other day and specifically asked him about one of the biggest criticisms against him and his agenda, and that is cashless bail. And by the way, he said that he's expecting by the end of this year, it could be $20 trillion of new investment into America, Michael.
Yeah, Maria, this often goes unreported how much capital investment is coming into our country. We had a 3.8% GDP last quarter. Atlanta Fed GDP now is tracking at 3.9% this quarter. And it's a whole of government policy to spur on the reindustrialization of our country. So a lot of this foreign investment is coming in to develop data centers for artificial intelligence, which is going to make our manufacturing smarter. You have Lee Zeldin at the EPA reducing environmental regulations, and then you also have tariffs making it much more advantageous for companies that want to do business here to operate here. So when you take this all of government approach, you start taking government stakes in critical infrastructure, all of a sudden you put this together and you're going to get a manufacturing renaissance here, which will lead to a higher productivity, highest multiplier jobs, highest multiplier industries for years to come.
Which is all the president's vision right there. All right, we're just getting started this hour. A lot to come. Government shut